Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Leadership Insights. My name is Eva Dace and I'm a member of the marketing department here at Vitech. I will be your host during today's webinar, which is being presented by Zane Scott. Zane is the Vice President of Professional Services here at Vitech, where he is the head of consulting services. For more than 6 years before joining Vitech, he worked on DoD contracts, analyzing and improving processes, and applying best practice models using MBSE and CORE to provide the modeling support. He has taught in a variety of disciplines in college and professional classes. Zane is a trained hostage negotiator and interventional mediator and speaks often on communication and conflict management. Now, before I let him take the stage, I would like to review a few housekeeping matters. Please take a few moments to get comfortable with your webinar control panel, as this is how you will be able to submit your questions or comments throughout the presentation. We will address questions at the end of the presentation, so please stay tuned. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to find the recording in the webinar archive in the resources section of our website within 24 hours of the live presentation. Today's webinar is brought to you by Vitech's newly redesigned MBSE Fundamentals course. To learn more about how to bring premier engineering techniques to your team, please click on this link that I'm about to send to you via the chat panel. So there you have it. You should see it now. So now, let me hand it over to our presenter. Welcome, Zane. Thanks for helping us kick off our spring webinar series.
Hi, Eva, and given the temperature that it is here in Baltimore, I'm really heartened by calling this the spring series.
Yes.
It's good to have even a reference to some warmth at the moment. I'm glad to be here, and especially glad to talk about a topic that is a very special interest of mine and has been throughout my career, and that's the topic of leadership. We very often give short shrift or fail to pay attention at all to the particular skills that surround leadership, and yet we very often suffer from those who would do that. So today we're going to discuss some insights and have really hints and tips kind of introduction to some of these topics. Why would we talk about leadership? Why talk about that with a technical audience? It's very interesting to me to look at the issue of technical leaders and soft skills. There are a couple of different perspectives here. One is the technical perspective. When you start talking what are referred to as soft skills to technical folks, and actually I kind of balk at the use of the term soft skills, but when I'm speaking to a technical audience, they all seem to understand what you mean when you say soft skills. And I balk at the pejorative aspects of that. But from a technical perspective, very often we're skeptical of what we see as a field that lacks, or a set of fields that lack hard research data. Soft skills very often means anything that can't be quantified, that can't be measured exactly. And some people in the non-technical fields will often react to this by trying to develop measures and develop metrics and develop mathematical descriptions of the field. But technical folks will tend to push off soft skills, and those include some of the skills that we'll talk about today and the skills that surround leadership. We had an interesting example of this. I was working in a fairly sizable consulting project. One of the things that we were trying to do was to bring some change, some fairly significant change in the organizational culture of a large technical organization. And up at the top of this technical organization was a guy who had first joined his organization as an analyst 6 months before I was born. And I'm almost 60 years old, so you can imagine how long he had been there. This was about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And we went to see him and talk about change management, which we very quickly perceived that he saw as soft skills. And he listened to our presentation about 2/3 of the way through. He cut us off. He shut us down. He said, you know, we already know how to handle change management, and I don't think we need to do any of this touchy-feely type stuff. So I asked him, I said, what's your change management model? And he said, well, if you work for me and I want to change something, I tell you that I want it changed, and I want it changed by Friday. And then Friday I come in and I check, and if it's changed, we're good, and if it hasn't changed, then I'll change you. And that was his change management model. Hopefully that's not a typical view of soft skills, but there's more truth in that, and more truth in general in that than we would like to suffer through sometimes. The other side of the perspective is that comes from the non-technical side. The non-technical folks say, what do you mean by talking about these important skills to technical people? Technical people are never going to grasp this. These are folks who, from the time they were in elementary school, have made the choice between dealing with people or things by saying, I want to deal with things. I like to deal with things. I want to count things. I want to describe things. And so they have made the things versus people choice in favor of things consistently. And now they get themselves into a position where they have to have people skills, and they have to deal with people, and they're unprepared, but it's probably too late. Well, there are things about the technical perspective that soft skills are not important, that they are soft in the sense of being soft-headed or not well developed. And there are things in the non-technical perspective that technical people can't appreciate, the people's type skills, that are untrue. Neither of those perspectives is entirely accurate, but neither should be forgotten either, because people operate from some degree of that perspective depending upon where they come from. What it boils down to in the leadership area is that leadership is a significant challenge for all of us. It doesn't matter whether we're technical leaders or we're leaders of an organization that's non-technical. Leadership is going to be a significant challenge. It's built around skill sets. It involves the ability to communicate with people, to manage conflict, to make decisions, to engage in all sorts of areas that contribute and add up to a set of leadership skills. And we can't get around it. We're leading people. So we have to develop those skills, and we have to use those skills. Now, in our particular area, systems engineers are especially well positioned to lead. I've written some on that proposition and talked some on that proposition. And I think that it is a very basic truth in our discipline. Systems engineers, by definition, are called upon to have a systems view, to look at the world, look at their projects, look at the systems that they design from the systems level, to understand how things fit together, to understand how things interact, to understand the system functioning, that the synergy that produces something that's well beyond even the sum of the parts. And because of that understanding and because of that view, that positions systems engineers uniquely to be leaders, because leaders have to have a systems view. Leaders have to understand the systems view of the problems that they confront. So systems engineers are particularly well positioned to be leaders. Now, we shouldn't mistake being positioned to lead for being equipped to lead, because we're not necessarily well equipped to lead. Sometimes that's left to chance. Some of us are naturally inquisitive about leadership topics and are interested in leadership and present ourselves well with other folks and do a good job of leadership, and some of us don't. What we're going to talk about today are some topics that I hope will spark your interest. If I could accomplish one thing with this webinar, it would be to inspire somebody to go out and to learn more and to acquire more skills and to be aware of some things that they're perhaps not aware of currently. To that end, we're going to talk about three basic areas. We're going to talk about leadership styles. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence, and here we use the EQ, emotional quotient, like we use the IQ for intelligence quotient. And we're going to talk about motivation. How do we motivate folks? All three of these areas are inextricably woven into the fabric of effective leadership. So let's get started. Let's look at the first area, which is leadership styles. Now, what is a leadership style? If you look at the academic world, their studies boil it down to two basic models of styles. One model sees styles as a set of attributes. So this model portrays it as characteristics, approaches, or particular attributes. So you'll hear all kinds of descriptions of leadership as a styles as a set of attributes. Leaders are tall. Leaders are articulate. Leaders are this or that, or leaders approach things in particular ways. And so that's one model of what leadership styles are. The other model approaches it as a set of skills. So we use a particular set of skills to exercise leadership, and we lead in particular ways using those skills. And you'll see a divergence in the academic literature. For our purposes, if you corner me and ask me, do you think leadership styles are a set of attributes, or do you think leadership styles are a set of skills? I'm going to say yes, because I think it's both. And I think the academic work that's been done in this field of leadership styles all has a bearing on representing a model of what leadership is, and leadership styles are, and it all has value for us to consider. So the next logical question for a leader is, do I have a style? Well, if your answer to that is that you have a style, you're in trouble. Because as leaders, we need more than one style. And here we talk about approaches, skill sets, any way you want to talk about it. You need more than one of those in your bag of tricks as a leader. Why is that? Because styles are situational. Leadership styles are useful in particular situations, and a good leader has to learn to transition from one style to another. Eva mentioned in her introduction that I'm trained as a hostage negotiator. I worked for a time as a negotiator as a part of a tactical team and responded with the team as a negotiator. When we went as a tactical team, one of our responsibilities was to serve what we called hazardous warrants, warrants on folks who had presented violence or resisted law enforcement, had engaged in particularly violent crimes. And so we would sometimes use what we called a dynamic approach, where we would go, and this is the thing you see on television with a line of guys, and the guys, two guys in front have a concrete filled pipe that they use to break down the door. And so they break down the door and you burst through the door and you're now inside. Well, the protocol is the first guy goes right, the second guy goes left. You execute on the plan. You yell clear when you clear the rooms. Everybody acts in a certain prescribed way. There is a person, the entry team leader, who is calling the shots. You follow those directions without question. When you break that door down, it's not time to gather everybody together and go into a weigh-in, buy-in approach. What do you see, guys? What do you think? Based on what you see now that the door is open, what do you think we ought to do? How many of you favor that approach? How many of you favor another approach? Of course, you can't engage in that. Does that mean that a command style of leadership is better than a weigh-in, buy-in, consensus style? No, it doesn't. It's like asking yourself, if you play golf, what's my favorite golf club? Well, what's my favorite golf club when I'm on the tee? What's my favorite golf club when I'm 10 feet from the pin on the green? What's my favorite golf club when I'm on the sand trap? That's in the sand trap. That's more like the question of leadership styles. So you need to develop a variety of styles and understand what situation calls for what style. These styles need to capitalize on your attributes. You have to tailor the style to fit your particular gifts and graces. I'm 6 feet tall and weigh about 250 pounds. So when I'm working with people, I can't use attributes that somebody with a more shy and retiring kind of physical presence might be able to use. But I need to capitalize on my size, my persona, my voice, my set of attributes. So we each need to take these styles and tailor them to use our own gifts to their best advantage. Secondly, we need to acquire and use skills. We need to have an extensive tool bag of skills that we can use and know what situations where they can be applied. And probably most importantly, we need to be intentional about it. We need to be intentional about what skills we're using. Whatever you're doing at the moment, do it on purpose. Do it for a reason. Have some rationale behind why you're using the skill you're using, why you're capitalizing on your attributes in a particular way, why you're approaching the situation with one style or another. So it's very important to be intentional. Let's talk about some styles, and there are as many styles as there are models, but I tried to do a couple of distillations here. The first one is a set of styles from different sources. The autocratic style is the top-down style. We lead by defining the situation and defining the responses, and we focus that in a central leader. That's a very autocratic style. In some situations, that's appropriate. When the team breaks down the door and goes in to get the bad guy, the autocratic style is probably the only way to go. The bureaucratic style sets up a structure and defines roles very closely and provides leadership out of that structure. So it's not focused on a central leader, but it's focused on a particular structure and a set of rules and processes for functioning. The charismatic style is personality based. This is a style that depends very heavily on the personality of the leader. A democratic style seeks to understand what the members of the team want and to incorporate their views, their knowledge. It's a very team-centric style. Laissez-faire says, as a leader, I'm here, you're a well-functioning team, I'm here to let you function and to intervene only when absolutely necessary. A people-oriented style, and this is as contrasted to a task-oriented style. People-oriented folks are folks who are focused on how we get through something in terms of how everybody feels about it and how everybody is in terms of their contribution and their ability to be a part of the process. And a task-oriented style says, you know, we're here to accomplish a few tasks. I had a business partner that he and I did a good deal of teaching and facilitating together, and we used to laugh when we would start. I would give an introduction and say, he's here to see that we accomplish all the things that we need to accomplish today, and I'm here to see that no one is killed or seriously injured in the process. Task orientation and people orientation, both are important and both figure into styles. The servant leader style is an enabling style. If I'm to be a servant leader and I'm leading a team that you're a member of, my job as a leader is to see that you have all the things that you need to be the best that you can possibly be on a day in, day out basis. I'm an enabler. I help you to perform in the ways that we've hired you to perform so that we can accomplish our goals. A transactional leader bases leadership on a contract. We elected someone president of the group, and everybody has voted for me, so that's a transaction, that's a contract. I'm exercising the leadership not because I'm making a statement that I'm better than anybody else, but everyone has agreed that somebody has to lead, and so I'm going to lead. A transactional leader can have autocratic, bureaucratic, charismatic, can draw from other styles, but the fundamental basis of their leadership is that we've all engaged in a social contract that sets up their leadership. And then we have a transformational leader. A transformational leader seeks to affect change in the group, seeks to affect change in the group that's being led, and to do that through the tools of leadership. Transformational leadership is often hooked to another style. Transformational leadership is a close cousin of servant leadership, and very often they're seen together. Here's some more styles, and these styles are drawn from a book that I recommend in the resource section of this presentation. The book is called Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman is an excellent writer who makes research and makes some complex subjects very accessible to his reading audience. When we talk about emotional intelligence, we'll talk about Daniel Goleman's book on that really kind of pushed emotional intelligence to the forefront. But he's subsequently written a book called Primal Leadership, a very good book, but he calls out 6 styles. He has a visionary leadership style. The visionary leader focuses on the end of the road. The visionary leader doesn't prescribe the path from the as-is to be focused on, to keep everybody's eyes on the goal, keeps everybody moving in the direction of the vision without lots of definition of the path. A coaching leader focuses on developing individuals. You'll find a coaching leader developing everybody's strength. If you have encountered the Strength Finder and the Marcus Buckingham book, Now Consider Your Strengths. All of that's part of a coaching style that helps people to develop their strengths and to become the best that they can be. An affiliative leader is there to develop harmony and morale and to improve communication or repair broken trust. What all that means is that the affiliative leader seeks to use a well-functioning team to enable the team to accomplish the goals that it's set out to accomplish. So the idea here is if the team doesn't function well, then there's really not a lot of hope that they're going to be able to accomplish what they need to. And so the affiliative leader works on the internal relationships and the communication and the trust that's there so that the group functions as well together as a group as they possibly can. The democratic style, as we talked about before, taps the group wisdom. That makes sure that everybody weighs in, that everybody buys in, and that the group benefits from all of the wisdom that's present in the members of the group. The pace-setting leader sets high standards. Lots of times this is an attractive style for leaders, especially people who are task-oriented. So a pace-setting leader would say, if I'm going to be a leader, I need to set an example. And so I'm going to work 60 hours a week, I'm going to work 80 hours a week or whatever, but they set high standards, and then they project those standards into the group and say, look, you know, here's what I'm doing, and if you're going to be effective, you need to follow this example. That can be in conjunction with some other leadership styles effective, but you have to be careful because it almost always is going to reach a point where it won't work, and it can actually backfire because it can build some ill will, and it develops problems. So I would steer away from it as an intentional choice. And the last style that Goldman sets out is the command style, the commanding leadership style, which is a more autocratic style. Very often some people equate this with leadership. The leader is in charge. You know, I'm here, I'm in charge, and that's the guy with the change model who says, if I want something changed, I'll simply let you know that it's to be changed, and then I'll check and see if you have done your part to make that happen. So there's two sets of leadership styles that represent skill sets and attribute sets and ways of approaching things. There are ways to assess styles, and some of those ways are research-based. There's a lot of good instruments out there. I'm going to highlight this one, not because I'm endorsing it, although if you forced me to endorse one, I probably would endorse this one, as much as to demonstrate that there are models out there and they can be tied with assessment instruments, and they're valuable principally because you can use them as a way of intentionally moving your leadership in an intentional direction. This model has 12 behavioral styles. These are grouped into three groups of 4 styles each. They're constructive behavior styles, so achievement-oriented, self-actualizing, humanistic, encouraging, and affiliative styles are all grouped together as constructive styles. And then there are defensive styles that are passive, and there are defensive styles that are aggressive. What human synergistics did, and this was a group of professors in industry folks in Ann Arbor who got together and did some research. They looked at successful leaders in business and industry, and they looked at what behaviors were manifest in those people who had a very high level of success. They studied that, and they came up with a way of measuring the presence of those preferences for behavioral styles in people. And they give to individuals, they give about a 200 question survey, and you answer those questions. You make choices, you pick between this and that. You've probably all taken surveys of that nature, and those are all tied, the individual questions are tied back to particular styles and particular ways of behaving. This is called the Leadership Styles Inventory, the LSI. If you take that, you take it yourself, describing yourself, and then you give it to 5 other people. You name 5 other people who get it. Actually, you don't give it to them. They get it from human synergistics. And they answer, and their answers are confidential. But their answers are aggregated, and you're encouraged to give it to a couple of colleagues, a couple of subordinates, a supervisor, people who know you from different aspects of your life and your leadership behavior, who know you well enough to have observed your behaviors in different situations. And then their responses are aggregated, so you get kind of a 360 look at yourself, the way you view yourself and the way others view you. And then those results are presented back to you, and the results are normed according to the research along a scale. If you look at this, you can sort of see that if we begin at the center point, the third line out, the third circle out is a darker circle, and this is the 50% mark. Half of the people are further out in terms of scores than this, and half are below it. So it's the median. But you're plotted along this scale for each one of these kinds of behavior. And then you're compared to the research that has talked about ideal leadership. Now, when you get your results, if you look toward the upper right there, that's the so-called ideal picture. And notice that the ideal picture is not without defensive behaviors. There have to be a certain amount of defensive behaviors there for success. The red are the aggressive defensive, the green are the passive defensive. So there's less of the green present and a little more of the red present, and then most of the behaviors are focused in the constructive areas. So that's kind of an ideal profile. In the lower left, you have a profile that's significantly less than ideal. This is a person who is very, very defensive. There are lots of things that you can read out of this in terms of these results and what do the results mean. But the point here is that when you get your profile, and it's especially instructional to say, hey, I look at myself this way, and apparently the rest of the world looks at me that way, and that's significantly different. Or I look significantly different than I would like to look. I'd like to develop more constructive behaviors. One of the best things about this index is that they've done a lot of research in what can you do to change the mixture of behaviors in your leadership style. And the report that you get back, which is about an inch and a half thick, contains a lot of practical suggestions that you can do. It suggests that in dealing with your subordinates for the next 30 days, you ought to do A and B in order to develop this particular skill. but it very much encourages you to have an intentional plan to improve your leadership, to reorient your style, and to get over the obstacles that stand between you and success, you and becoming more effective. So, leadership styles are situational. We all need more than one, and we can improve our styles, and there are ways of measuring and talking about improving them. The next topic is emotional intelligence. So first, what is emotional intelligence? Salovey and Meyer in 1990 put out an article that kind of kicked it off. There was some discussion in the literature before this of emotional intelligence, but it really didn't start to become a serious topic of research and development until this paper in 1990. And in that paper they said, emotional intelligence is the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and action. In other words, the ability to understand our own emotions and the emotions of the people around us, and to see how that plays into how we are acting and behaving, and to use that to craft our thinking and our strategies going forward. So why would we care? Why do we care about emotional intelligence? Why do we care about emotions? I had a boss very early on in my career that says, I just wish people would leave all this emotional crap at home. And that's a very common kind of a feeling. But we're all complex creatures made up as the sum of our experiences and our own particular attributes in terms of emotional response. And emotions are there. You can't get rid of them. So the reason that we care about emotional intelligence is we want to be able to deal with emotion rather than just let it deal with us. So we want to be able to understand our emotions. Well, let's look at Salovey and Meyer's model for dealing with emotions. They divided their model into 4 branches. They said emotional intelligence was made up first of perceiving emotions, then reasoning with the emotions, then understanding the emotions, and then managing the emotions. So the first thing is we need to learn to perceive emotions. This is a very interesting and fairly complex world. If any of you are familiar with the show that was on television several years ago called Lie to Me, Lie to Me was specifically about accessing people's emotions as an indicia of their truthfulness, and learning what the tells are, what the signs are of those emotions. So it was about learning to perceive the emotions of others. It's also about learning to perceive our own emotions. How do you know when you're getting angry? How do you know when you're feeling depressed? How do you get in touch with your own feelings? Now, we would tend to think that ought to be fairly obvious, but it's really surprising sometimes how out of touch with their own feelings people are. So perceiving is first gathering the data that's significant. Then reasoning with emotions is starting to understand the significance of it and how it plays in decision-making processes, how it plays in our ability to think through problems. So we perceive the emotions, and then we learn how they play out in our reasoning process. The next level is understanding emotions, understanding where they come from. What's the genesis of the emotion? Why is it there? Why do we feel this way? Why do other people feel this way? which leads us to understanding why we and others respond in particular ways. So as we begin to learn why things are that way, we begin to learn why people have particular responses. And then finally, the next level is managing emotions. So can we learn to deal with our emotions? Can we learn to manage our own emotions? Can we learn to manage the emotions of others? Can we learn to deal with it? Salovey and Meyer suggest that these are in order of low to high levels of functionings. The lowest level of emotional intelligence is being able to perceive. The highest level is being able to manage. So these are step functions up in terms of low to high emotional intelligence. How do we increase our emotional intelligence? Can we intentionally increase our emotional intelligence? We can. One of the ways of increasing our effectiveness by increasing our emotional intelligence is learning tricks to rapidly reduce stress in the moment. Learning to recognize when stress is coming on and learning to deal with it so that we can have it under control, so that we can deal with it in the moment. It's really fascinating. There's a concept that's discussed in Goleman's book on emotional intelligence that talks about a limbic hijacking. We have a system in our brain that is centered around the amygdala, and the amygdala is like a traffic control structure. It takes the inputs that come in, like an air traffic controller takes planes entering the airspace. It looks at that information, and if there is nothing particularly alarming in that information, if there's nothing that would trigger a fight or flight or freeze reaction, then the amygdala simply allows that to pass through and to go on to the cerebral cortex, which is where our judgment and rational thinking functions reside. So we're puttering along through the day and non-stressful information is coming in. It goes to the cerebral cortex for processing. At the point where stress-inducing information comes in, information that would cause us to flee or cause us to fight or cause us to freeze, comes in, the amygdala immediately shuts down the access to the cerebral cortex and rechannels that information to go into the limbic system and to be processed by the structures that in the center of our brain that we call the lizard brain. So it shuts down our access to rational thinking processes and puts us in an automatic pilot, fight, flight, or freeze type reaction. It does this by releasing a set of chemicals that block the access to the cerebral cortex and open things up in the limbic system. This is interesting because that flood of chemicals lasts about 10 seconds. If there has been no further stressful information, or if we have not reinforced by looking for further stressful information, if we've not reinforced that reaction, at the end of 10 seconds, the chemical release will subside and things will open back up to normal. We'll regain access to our rational thinking processes. That's interesting because we've probably all been told by our parents, grandparents, wise friends, or whoever, if we feel ourselves getting angry or we feel that we're in a stressful situation, count to 10. And that's folkways type advice that's very sound from a neurophysiological point of view. Count to 10 is excellent advice. Why? because that's probably going to take you beyond that flood of chemicals and give you access to your problem solving capacity at the point where you need that capacity the worst. So simple techniques like that, techniques that reduce stress in the moment, especially emotional stress, can help us to improve our functioning and our effectiveness by improving our emotional intelligence. We can learn to beat relationship stress with emotional awareness. If we're aware of the emotional state of people around us and why they are in those states, what's causing that response, it'll help us a great deal to reduce stress in relationships. One of the best things you can possibly do when somebody says something that appears to be emotionally charged is to ask yourself a simple question. What would cause a thinking adult to say, act, do something like they've just done? What could possibly cause that? And to the extent that we know them and we're aware of their emotional state and we're aware of where that state comes from, we can better do that. So we can reduce the stress in the relationship by understanding through emotional intelligence. We can increase our emotional intelligence by understanding nonverbal communication. We can understand what the signs mean. We can understand defensive postures. We can understand the inability to meet someone's gaze. We can understand the nonverbal cues that give us cues to what the emotional state is. We need to learn to use humor and play to deal with challenges. When you're in a charged up environment, you can very often break the tension with humor, or especially the use of self-deprecating humor. An emotionally charged environment is not the time to make fun of the other person. And we have to be very careful about the use of humor because it can backfire. So if you're being accused of shutting down, say, a large bridge, and you are not far enough into it to know that as a result of shutting down the bridge, it's caused a traffic jam, and the traffic jam has kept an ambulance from getting to a little old lady who's having a heart attack, then you might be tempted to use humor and say, oh yeah, I did this for sure. I was out, I was the guy moving the cones around to redirect the traffic. Probably not so funny after after all of the real consequences came out. So you have to know the situation, but if you do, humor and playfulness can be very helpful in dealing with challenges. By increasing our emotional intelligence, we can tap in and manage conflict positively. We can use conflict to drive innovation in our group, and we can keep conflict from wreaking havoc with the group dynamics. What are the benefits of a higher level of emotional intelligence? Well, one of the first benefits is that we learn to handle relationships well. We learn to understand other folks in those relationships. Friend of mine has a saying, the common denominator in all your failed relationships is you. And there's truth running around in that statement. The more emotionally intelligent we are, the better we can handle the relationships, because we begin to understand our role and the role of other folks. As we talked about, we can deal constructively with conflict. We can use conflict as an engine and not just seek to avoid it. We can produce greater results. Why? Because the world around us begins to function more efficiently and more openly as we develop our emotional intelligence. And we can build better external relationships, better customer relationships. So emotional intelligence doesn't just apply to dealing with our internal team. It applies to how we deal with the world as well. Well, the third concept is that of motivation. What really motivates us? The traditional notion is that rewards motivate us, that money, benefits, perks, privileges, those things motivate us. But that really actually flies in the face of most of the research over the last 50 years, which says not so fast, not so much. When we look at it, we find that mechanical activities, so piece rate, production line type activities, are motivated by rewards. So the greater the rewards, the greater the amount of mechanical activity that you can get. The research says, though, this does not apply. This relationship does not apply in the world of cognitive work, knowledge work. And knowledge work is the kind of work that most of us deal with. And the kinds of teams that we lead are made up of knowledge workers. Very, very interesting book by Daniel Pink called Drive. And I'll refer to all these books in our resource list here, and you can view them on the web. But Daniel Pink wrote a book called Drive, where he looks at just exactly this issue of how you motivate folks. Knowledge workers want three things typically. They want autonomy, they want mastery, and they want purpose. First, by autonomy, they want to be able to control how they do their work to a large extent. So to the extent that it's possible, they want to be able to specify how they do their work. Secondly, they want a sense of mastery. They want it to be able to know how good they are at something, and they want to be able to know how to get better at it. So they want an ongoing path toward an increasing level of mastery over their work. And then finally, they want to know that they're doing meaningful work that accomplishes some sort of an overarching purpose. So they're involved in and have a significant piece in something that matters. They want purpose in their work. So what does that mean in terms of the leadership connection? As we connect with folks as leaders, what does it mean for us? It means that the fundamental work of the leader is to provide that environment of motivation, that we need to seek to provide autonomy. We need to seek to encourage people to develop a sense of mastery. And we need to seek to give them a clear vision of where we're going and what their role in where we're going is. We need to capture and project the vision. Now, in the past, it was thought that the leader was responsible for casting the vision. And that's sometimes true. Sometimes the leader is the one who needs to define the vision and to cast the vision for the group. But it's not always true. What is always true is whether it comes from the leader themselves, or it comes from the group, or it comes from an external source that charters the team, the leader is the one who's responsible for capturing that vision and projecting it where the team can see it, can move toward the vision. So it's the leader's responsibility to capture and project the vision. It's the leader's responsibility to balance the task and people concerned. You have to accomplish the task. You can't constantly be stopped along the side of the road taking care of the people. And there are people who are really needy and who can drag the team down. And you have to learn to deal with that, but you have to deal with it in a way that's balanced to accomplish the task that you want to accomplish as well. But you can't hold the task in such a way that it chews up the people in the process. The task can't eat up people. as you try to move in that direction. So you have to be able to develop some balance. And finally, you need to enable the team. You need to enable the team as a group, so you need to learn to work with the team in terms of the group relationships and their functioning together. And you need to enable the individuals. So you need to be in touch with the individual people that we lead, so that we can enable those folks as individuals so that they can contribute meaningfully to the team and to your overarching goals and vision. So let's sum up. The first thing to say is be intentional. Leadership is based in knowledge. Leaders are made, not born. You get to be a leader by understanding leadership, and you get to be a leader by practicing leadership. One thing to keep in mind is that the best performer is not necessarily the best leader, because the skill set necessary to be an excellent performer are almost always different than the skill set necessary to be an excellent leader. I have a good friend who passed away recently who used to say to me, and he was a school superintendent, he said that almost always the result of making your best teacher the new principal is that you get a poor principal and you've just lost your best teacher. And his message there was that the skill set that set up excellence in the classroom was not the skill set that would set up excellence in the front office. And we tend to lose track of that. The leader's the person who's been here the longest. He started out in the organization 6 months before I was born. He survived everybody. He's now the leader. Or the leader is the best performer, the outstanding engineer, the outstanding artist, the outstanding teacher, whatever, becomes the leader. Because that's how we reward folks, and that's what outstanding performers will come to aspire to. Organizations struggle with that all the time, and they cope with it in different ways. Some people have technical tracks, which are set up to provide recognition and rewards for technical excellence that do not necessarily require that you go into a management or leadership track. The second thing is, remember that emotion is contagious. Leaders project their emotional affect. The old saying is, if I ain't happy, nobody's happy. Well, that applies to the leader as well. And so if you have a leader who is constantly projecting a negative emotional affect, then you can't expect to have a team with a positive emotional affect. It's just not going to happen, because they're going to pick up the cues. And so sometimes it's incumbent on the leader to be certainly to be more positive than they feel, and in some cases to be more positive than is warranted, because you need the positive emotional affect to get the group going. And recognize and understand the emotion that comes back at you from others. Recognize that you can catch it from them as well. Emotion is contagious when you project it, but emotion is contagious when you take it in as well, so it can influence you. And then finally, provide motivation. Understand what really motivates the people that you lead, and set up an environment that provides that really is motivating, and you'll be surprised at what you can achieve. Now, I promised you resources, so here is a kind of a scratch the surface set of resources. Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman. We already mentioned that. The Emotionally Intelligent Manager, Caruso and Salovey. Salovey and Meyer were the authors of the first paper. Caruso was also involved in the early research there. This is a more academic treatment of emotional intelligence, but it's not inaccessible. It's more discipline than in an academic sense of discipline. Then the next book, which is Emotional Intelligence, which is emotional intelligence cast so that it could be well understood by a broad audience. And Goldman does a good job of that, as he always does when he's writing for a general audience. The book Drive by Daniel Pink has to do with motivation and pulls out the three things that knowledge workers want that we discussed above. And then Servant Leadership by Robert Greenleaf. Robert Greenleaf was a GE executive who studied leadership closely throughout his career. And when he retired, he wrote a book on servant leadership. He talks about the servant model for leaders. The Greenleaf Institute is continues his work in the area of developing servant leaders and servant leadership in organizations. But that's an interesting book about that particular orientation and style of leadership. So we are to the point where we can take questions. Here's a reference to our website, to our community, and my own email. I'm perfectly happy to dialogue with you if you don't want to ask your question in the open environment of the webinar. I'm perfectly happy to take your question by email, and I'd like to talk about leadership, as you can probably tell, and would be happy to discuss that with anybody. So, Eva, if there are questions, I'd be glad to take them, and I appreciate everybody's time and attention.
Yes, absolutely, Zane. We have a couple good questions from our audience, and if you haven't already, I encourage the rest of you to join our discussion and submit those questions using the chat feature in your webinar control panel. So now let's move on to those questions. Our first question is from Allison. If you had to give one hint about leadership, what would it be?
Allison, I think it would be to get curious about this, to get interested. Recognize that good leadership is the result of the acquisition of knowledge and skills, and to become interested in the dynamics of people, the interactions of people, the way groups operate together, the leadership skills and topics. So I guess it would be to catch the fever. W.B. Yeats said that education was more akin to lighting a fire than filling a bucket. And if I were to say one thing about leadership, it is, if you want to be a good leader, then let it light your fire and see where that goes.
All right, that's great advice. Thank you. Our next question is from Jack. Which style includes statusing and corrective action to minimize deviations? It's which leadership style?
That could be an element in a number of styles, depending upon which model you have. That's an interesting conundrum in the area of leadership. That's almost leaders as the disciplinarian, reducing your process deviation and keeping track of the status. Those are important, but effective leaders tend to do that in ways that it doesn't become obvious or set aside. If you go to a group and say, "Good morning, I'm your leader, and I'm here to tell you how far along the road you've come, and to get those of you who have wandered over to the side back on track," you're probably going to have some problems in your leadership. So it is incorporated in a number of styles. It's important for the group, but it's something that you have to be very, very careful about.
Okay, well, thank you. And that is actually all the questions that I have for today. So our Q&A is short and sweet. And if any of you think of any questions or comments that you didn't get a chance to send in, you can email Zane directly, or you can also go to our community site and start a chat there. That is at community.vitechcorp.com. And as I mentioned before, a recording of today's webinar will be posted in the resources section of our website within the next 24 hours. So that just about wraps up today's presentation. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and be on the lookout for the next webinar of our spring season. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more spring-like then. And we should be adding that to the webinar calendar hopefully in the next few days. So let me chat out a link to you to a webinar calendar. All right, there you go. So at the conclusion of this webinar, a survey will open on your screen. Please take a moment to give us some feedback on today's presentation or on any topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. So that is all for today. Once again, thank you all very much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.